Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching NDTV and this is Battle for States, a show where we track elections and their impact very closely. Today we'll talk about jobs and skills and education that lead to jobs. Economic mobility, as we all know, is a prerequisite for development, and if there's one thing that Bihar's caste survey data does, is to reiterate the importance of caste when it comes to jobs and livelihoods. Following the release of caste survey data on Tuesday, Chief Minister of Bihar, Nitish Kumar, wants to increase the quota limit for SCs, STs and OBCs to 65% in the state. But where are the jobs? As per the Bihar data, less than 5% of the state's population is employed with something that can barely qualify as a jobs. Remember, less than 5% of the entire state. And these jobs are in the government, formal and unorganized sectors. Now, Bihar's record of less than 3% formal jobs is quite poor compared to the all India average of more than 9%. And also, the data shows that only 1.57% or around 2 million people in the state held government jobs, and even fewer, just about 1.22% people held private jobs in the organized sector. Now, nearly 2.14% or 2.79 million people worked in the private unorganized sector. So, shouldn't the government be focusing on increasing this pool of jobs rather than think of ways to ration and distribute them to achieve social justice? Now, there's another set of data that is coming out of this caste survey, which is about the level of quality education in the state. There are just 6.7% OBC graduates and a tiny 0.3% engineering graduates that belong to this category. Shouldn't the focus be on making students more employable? Because after all, quality education is what leads to better skilling and probably qualitatively better jobs. These are the big questions we are asking tonight. I have a panel of esteemed guests to help us understand this matrix of caste, jobs and education. Political commentators Yogendra Yadav, Rajat Sethi and political analyst Amitabh Tiwari join us today. But before we start, thank you all of you for joining me. But before we start, let me go across to my colleague Mayank Mishra, who has examined Bihar's caste survey data in detail. Mayank, what are the detailed findings about condition of every caste group in Bihar, say about the access to education and jobs specifically? Has years of affirmative action or reservation worked on some fronts, and what are your major learnings?
I will tell you, one of the major headlines coming out of Bihar caste census data is that privileged groups, privileged caste, and I use this word on purpose, I don't use upper or lower caste. Privileged castes have disproportionate share of, or they are overrepresented in government jobs and quality jobs in private sector. And I will give you one example. Bhumihars, and they belong to a privileged group. They are supposed to be overrepresented in government jobs and private jobs also, but they also suffer from very high level of deprivation, in the sense that and I will give you another example, there are 33% EBC households which suffer from poverty, and the number for Bhumihars is 27 or 28%, and situation is no different with regard to Brahmins or castes or Rajputs. So, the level of deprivation across all caste group is what is more stunning, and that is something I think we need deeper examination rather than focusing on big headlines. Similarly, with regard to three dominant groups of OBCs, Yadavs, Kurmis and Kushwaha, and they have been part of ruling elite for almost 3 decades, and they are also, compared to their peers in the same category, they are overrepresented in government jobs and quality private sector jobs. But they also, these households of majority of households of these groups also suffer from extreme deprivation. So, depending on how we interpret the data, we can make a case for continuing with quota, and we can also make a case for complete overhaul of the quota system.
Right. Thank you, Mayank. Those are very interesting details. Let me go across to Mr. Yadav first. Sir, we have seen that caste networks play an important role in shaping economic mobility, in the Indian economy. And many would also say that these caste networks disappear when market economy starts to function efficiently. But when I look at Bihar's data, there are caste groups that feature predominantly as beneficiaries of jobs, but a large section of the same groups also remains poor. How do you see this phenomenon, sir?
Thank you, Vasudha. I think we should begin by focusing on what the real findings of this survey are, because there's so much confusion and so much of useless data is being thrown around generally. Look, Bihar is a poor state. We've always known it. Bihar, the level of education is very low. We've always known it. That the scheduled castes are particularly disadvantaged and the small scheduled tribe in Bihar, we've always known it. This survey brings out something specific which has not been known before. Namely, this is the first time that we have an economic and educational profile of the OBCs and the upper caste or the general caste. And for the first time that we have a separate breakup of economic and educational profile of the each jati within the agras, the upper caste, and each jati within the OBC and EBC. And what we witness is absolutely shocking level of difference. Yes, if Bihar is very poor, everyone is poor, and that poverty extends to upper caste as well. I mean, everyone has known it. So many of the rickshaw pullers who come to Delhi are actually Brahmins. So this should not shock us. We know that if a state is overall so poor, some bit of poverty is spread to every section of society. What this survey has shown is absolutely shocking level of internal inequality. I'll give you just one example. People whose household income is more than 50,000 per month. In Delhi, they would not even be called middle class. In Delhi, you would call them kind of trying to be middle. A lower middle class. In Bihar, that is the extreme top category, with only 3% of the population fitting there. Now, probably 4%. Interesting thing is the breakup. Among the upper caste, it's 9%. Among the OBC, it's 4%. Among the EBC, it's 2%. And among the SC, it's 1%. Such is the gross level of inequality. Similarly, if you focus on high quality education, the proportion is 1:10. The proportion of those who have employable degrees between Dalits and the Brahmins or the upper caste is 1:10. So we have absolutely shocking, unacceptable levels of inequality, and something needs to be done. So to my mind, before we jump into this debate, so should we do away with quota? Do we need more quota? Unfortunately, in any serious analysis, if there was a disease, first thing that you would do is to carry out an X-ray or an MRI. Second step would be to very closely look at it. Surprisingly, shockingly, and disappointingly in this case, right from day one, no one had interest in X-ray or MRI, and you know how seriously it was opposed. And before the result comes in, before people even begin to pour at the tables, we've not even looked at 10% of the data so far, I can tell you.
Right.
Everyone wants to jump at the medicine, because the whole point, and I'm afraid this really brings out something very sorry about our country, that the entire focus is on, should we do away with the medicine? Isn't the medicine too bad? Should we have another medicine?
Right.
Why are we not able to focus on the reality? And I would really urge upper caste Indians, I would really urge privileged Indians to please think about it. Our country suffers from a very serious disadvantage and discrimination. Just as we worry about gender discrimination, which should be focused, just as we worry about poverty, which should be focused, we should also be worried about caste discrimination. This is close to the kind of discrimination that you saw in South Africa. This is close to racial discrimination that we have in this country, and something ought to be done about it. So I would really urge in this discussion us to focus on what this debate, what this report shows us.
Right.
And be sensitive about what we really have seen here.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Yadav. I'll try doing that. Mr. Sethi, what really stands out in Bihar's case, and I understand Mr. Yadav's point here also, that, what stands out for me is the fact that very small part of the workforce of the state is engaged in organized private employment. In fact, the share of workforce which is employed in government sector in Bihar is also quite low. A large workforce is in the state which is engaged in either farming or blue-collared non-farm jobs such as daily wage labor. What does this say about the social distribution of jobs in the state?
Well, I think the entire exercise is about dividing zero. Bihar is almost at zero whenever it comes to every single metric that you pull out. This was a political exercise. We knew that a similar exercise was done right around the corner in elections time, 2013, around that time. 5,000 crore rupees of of India's resources were wasted in doing the census, and we got the results out, and then it was none other than Chidambaram ji himself who said that this data is not reliable. My point is that these exercises are being done. It should be done away from the cloud of the elections. If the intent is correct, I question the intent. The intent is pure politics, nothing else. Mr. Nitish Kumar has been in the chair for 20 years. What has he ever done in terms of increasing the size of the pie? If Nitish Kumar would not be called here to campaign, I'm sitting in Telangana, none of these issues are actually being raised by any India Alliance member here. Why? Because the size of the pie is big enough for every community first to assert their minimal livable conditions. They have demanded it from their politicians generation after generation and have got a rightful place in the society, a respectful place in the society. After that, you can, yes, talk about representational issues, like is it enough societies, enough castes and communities are getting represented in that pie or not, then that's a debate. Here, the pie is zero. And all these politicians want to, look at hashing and dashing out the data and trying to create outcomes out of it. Go to Bihar, as Yogendra ji was mentioned correctly. There is a very, very thin crust of, so to say, well-to-do families. I would say families, not even communities, who are actually sitting on some resources there. The entire state is poor. Right. And no political leader, you see Tejasvi when he came, he said, I'll create 10 lakh jobs. Boss, how will you create 10 lakh jobs? You promised that the first cabinet meeting, I will create those many government jobs. And I understand. All these were political jumlas at the end of the day. Till date, he has not had the cabinet meeting where he could come out with even 1 lakh, 2 lakh, 3 lakh jobs. And then say that, okay, this is my roadmap, how I'm going to uplift various underrepresented societies in the economic pie and give them the fair bit of share. The point is that if you do not work on the basics, if your intent is flawed, and I question the intent, they want to rake up this entire issue right around the election just to, play with the emotions of various communities who are underrepresented, picking up a completely an outlier example of Bihar where everything is literally zero. There is no industry. There are no private sector jobs. There are abysmally small amount of government sector jobs wherein the entire debate is happening around. So right. I don't know what the long-term, short-term, medium-term goal is. Neither they have this spelled out. The easiest thing that they can do is a legislative exercise. Kyunki 2 line bolna hai. You just come out and say, okay, I increase the quota. Now, this quota question will be challenged in the Supreme Court. So the politicians' hands are washed. See, I did everything that I could to do justice, right. to do economic justice through quota. But then nobody cares what legal questions would come up or not. What would be the eventual jobs that will reach to these communities? Right. What are those policy frameworks? He had enough time to do that. He had 20 years before Bihar as the chief minister of the state to do all of these things. Did he do anything? Or does he want to do anything? So that's an intent question that I want to highlight.
Right. So, Mr. Sethi raising a very important point. Of course, he's making a political point, but like Mr. Yadav, he's also talking about the need to look at this data very seriously. Mr. Tiwari, now data from periodic labour force survey also shows that Bihar is among the worst states when it comes to share of better jobs among India's largest states. Now, the share of salaried or regular wage workers is about 8.6% in Bihar. This is what the 2022-2023 PLFS data says. It's the lowest among all large states. The median share of regular wage workers across 21 large states of the country is around 22.7%. How do you see Bihar addressing a problem like this? Because while creating opportunities is one thing for the state, which, like Mr. Yadav was also pointing out, is becoming a challenge, and there are also concerns of average pay and quality of jobs.
See, essentially, Bihar is a landlocked state, and industry or any capex from corporates is not happening here for a long time now. Correct. So that's why people have been migrating. 50 lakh people have migrated to other states. There are no private sector jobs, and you mentioned there are only 20 lakh government jobs. So on a 20 lakh government job, a party has promised that it will create 10 lakh government jobs, which is not at all possible. So what this survey shows or depicts is not everything which the survey says or comes out with was not known earlier. It just provides data and credence to the fact that the upper caste or the privileged among the OBCs occupy the major portion of the jobs and have a higher per capita income than the lower class. That's a given fact. This just provides credence. Now, we need to understand the data in depth. But what has the government done? Without understanding the data, it has gone and proposed an increase in the quota. So that's also debatable, because there is already a quota which has been there for a long time now, for 30 years. And of course, the findings of the survey do bring in a question, or there has to be a debate about the efficacy of the existing quota system and whether this quota system has led to this inequality, or this inequality has not been able to be solved by the existing quota system.
Right.
That's number.
Yeah,
everyone is poor.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone
I'd like
is
to
poor.
come to another point, and which is something that you will also like. Now, the data is out. It set into motion another intense debate, and which is about this affirmative action in the private sector. The question many of us have been asking for years is, why should the private sector be immune to the goal of social justice? This is something Mr. Yadav has also spoken about earlier. Mayank Mishra, my colleague, will join us now. And I remember even in the EWS judgment, one of the judges in the bench had specifically talked about contribution of private companies when it comes to distributive justice. What are the main arguments in the past when we are talking about jobs? What are the main arguments in the past, about what are the arguments that have contributed to private sector being, responsible for sort of like, just and socially just employment? Mayank, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I will start with a quote from 2008 Harvard Business Review, and it says, for companies often thrive or fail based on the quality of their workforce. So, quality of workforce is extremely important for companies, whether if they survive or fail. So, first argument from companies' point of view, and many of them have spelled this out clearly, is that we give blood, sweat, money, everything to build a company, and the least we expect is to have a say, a big say in who we hire, so that we don't fail. And we have had this debate for almost 2 decades, and during UPS days, all industry chambers of commerce came together and they came out with voluntary code of conduct, and then their focus was on reskilling and training underprivileged groups so that they become employable, and once they are employed, they grow also. So this is one set of argument, and quite opposed to that argument is from various political classes also, is that since private sector job is the only growth sector, and since job opportunities are available only in private sector, and government jobs has almost stagnated, so there has to be affirmative action in private sector also. And the third kind of view is what I call Yogendra ji's views, and since he is already here, so he will give details of what his views are.
Mr. Yadav, what would you say to that, sir? Because do you think the private sector also needs to step up when it comes to creation and implementation of socially just employment policies?
Now, one of the things we must carefully look at in this particular data, and I'll focus on this data because something fresh has come and we owe it to this report that we read it. what we see is the very sharp difference between the share of different castes and communities in government jobs versus private organized sector jobs. And the answer is very simple. Those who come from traditionally privileged communities have a decent share in the government jobs, and they have a decent share in private jobs as well. But those who come from traditionally disadvantaged communities, some of them have managed to get some share thanks to the policy of reservation in government jobs. But the moment you look at the next column of private sector jobs, it just plummets, which is to say to my friends who have, Tiwari ji might wish to take a look at this table, it actually demonstrates that you need reservation policy. It actually gives you counterfactual what the job situation would have been if there was no reservation. You just have to look at the next column in Bihar survey and you get to see how shockingly uneven things would have been but for reservation. So the simple answer that comes out is that reservation is necessary but not sufficient. About the private sector, Mayank didn't get the time, I think, enough to look at the entire literature. I think there's enormous literature now in the private sector, in business reviews and all the management suggestions that diversity contributes to, diversity of workforce improves the quality. That, in fact, keeping the pool from which you recruit is so tiny in India. I can't imagine that expanding the pool will not improve the quality. It's an astonishing thing in this country that everyone seems to believe that as long as you recruit only from the 10%, you would get quality. And the moment you give chance to the remaining 90%, 80% of this population, suddenly quality would suffer. I mean, this is an astonishing argument. I don't know where it comes from. I would like to, so what we need careful monitoring of opportunities and internal social inequalities within the private sector. Should we go for reservation? I have repeatedly argued that we should play with more sophisticated instruments than reservation. There was a Prime Minister's committee about 12 years ago. I was a member of that committee, which had made a series of suggestions about what actually can be done about the private sector without getting into reservation in the first instance. Right. Those examples should be looked at. But if the resistance to reservation, resistance to any form of affirmative action continues to be what I see in the case of Bihar, then maybe a year or two from now, even I will have to say, no, let's go for reservation in the private sector, which is not a smart idea. It's not the best idea. But if nothing else works, you will have to go with that. One point I did want to make about what Rajat had said, I think it's very unfortunate in this larger national debate for us to have to choose between either increasing the size of the pie or giving fair share of the slice. Because remember, this argument can be used at the India level as well. You know, India's small pie is very small. Don't talk about men and women. We'll look at that later. Let's increase the size of the pie. I mean, these are rudimentary arguments. I think what we need is both. Bihar needs it. India needs it. We need to increase the size of the pie, yes. And with it, we need to ensure fair distribution. Both these things are essential. And incidentally, that continues to be the question in Telangana as well. I have also visited there last year and last week. And the representations I got from the OBC communities there, including communities which were OBC in Andhra Pradesh but are not so in Telangana. Sir, this question of caste inequalities is very much a live and burning issue in Telangana as well as it is in the rest of the country. So let's all focus on both these things. Right. Overall growth and equal distribution. Right. We cannot choose.
Rajat, would you like to respond to that? I'll also come to Mr. Tiwari because I want to know both your views on reservation in the private sector. But Mr. Sethi, would you like to respond to what Mr. Yadav said?
Well, I think he did not clearly listen to what I said. I said states like Telangana, Maharashtra, these kind of states have achieved a level of development where the jobs are pouring in, and you can do a much more concise understanding of how has the representational aspects of affirmative action have actually had, fruits on the ground. If it is not, you can bring in those discussions that whether a private sector should voluntarily come in and put up some kind of an affirmative action, or should it be forced to that. Those debates should happen in these states who have done their basic heavy lifting of ensuring that there are enough government and enough private sector jobs in the first place. A state like Bihar shouldn't prioritize things wherein their basics are only missing out. I mean, tell me one private sector job which has come in. Tell me one industrial group which is coming in with a foreign direct investment into Bihar. Tell me one example of any big company who is looking to set up software industry, or look at setting up an entrepreneurial ecosystem or a startup ecosystem. Give me an example. Right. Give me one cluster which is coming up and doing wonders.
Okay, we're running short of time. Mr. Tiwari, would you like to respond to that, please? On the need for private sector to also step up, something that Mr. Yadav also talked about, and something Mr. Sethi is talking about, Bihar setting its basics right before getting into privatization. Would you like to say anything on that?
And of course, Bihar needs to set its basic right. What this socio-economic survey shows is that, irrespective of the fact that there are not government jobs, at least in the educational space, the reservation and affirmative action will lead to increase or improvement in the quality and skills of the workforce, which will help the workforce to, at least if not get a job there, at least in some other states. And the state needs to devise policies, landlocked states particularly like Bihar, to attract investments so that their workforce is better employed in the state and there is lesser migration and this inequality is reduced. See, Yadavji, I was mentioning the same fact which you mentioned, that there are heaps of data which needs to be analyzed and studied, but the Bihar government has gone ahead and announced an increase in reservation without probably going into the details of the survey report and having a basic discussion with dignitaries like you and other economists going for this.
Right, Mr. Tiwari, we're running short of time. I'm really sorry. We'll take this discussion forward some other day. Thank you, Mr. Tiwari. Thank you, Mr. Yadav. And thank you, Mr. Sethi, for joining us on this debate. That was our panel on the findings of Bihar Caste data on jobs and livelihoods. That's all we have for you in the battle for states. Thank you for watching NDTV. Stay tuned for more news and updates.